The University of Pennsylvania Law School is proud to host Pia Hope, the CEO of Vinge, Sweden's largest law firm, which is consistently ranked as the most gender equal law firm in Sweden, if not all of Europe. Pia Hope is herself one of the most accomplished lawyers in the area of banking, finance, M&A transactions. But her true passion is in leadership and in law firm management. And she has spent the last 2 decades of her life as a trailblazer, opening doors for women, not just in her own law firm, Vinge, but using that as a microcosm, as a platform, as a launching point to transform the legal profession and the corporate law field in Sweden and all of Europe. And she has larger ambitions to bring that message all across Europe and the world. So we are honored to have you with us, Pia. And my first question to you comes out of a statement that you made when you were thrice honored, 3 times in a row, as Sweden's leading businesswoman. This is an exhilarating award. It is an exhilarating time for you, a time for hope and time for promise and new beginnings for women around the world. And at that moment, you said, I am honored over my inclusion in the list. The diversity work here at our law firm has generated a better service, and it is central for Vinge. Now, that centrality didn't come out of nowhere. It was not an isolated effort. You worked at it. You put in structures and policies and transformative cultural practices that created a new culture, a new movement, and then you rode the wave, the MeToo movement that is sweeping across the world to create new opportunities for women. So can you start from the very beginning on how you got to a point where now diversity pays? It is about the smart thing to do. It's not only about the right thing to do, it's a smart thing to do. Your law firm is now seeing real economic results because of diverse teams, because of the way in which these diverse teams have created creative thinking, innovative insights. And you are now reaping the benefits of your inclusive and diverse teams. So can you take us back and share that story with us?
Well, a pleasure to be here, first of all. Really thrilled. And yes, happily so. I should say that I'm only 125 on the most powerful list. So starting off with typical female trait, being slightly humble. I believe in that. I think that's a good thing. I think with us, like the rest of the world, private practice has been a backwaters in terms of gender equality, whereas the Swedish community as a whole is relatively equal. We got a relatively equal government, a relatively equal parliament. Business life is not as diverse as it could be, and that certainly applies in particular to law firms in private practice. And we have felt that it is very important in this day and age to make sure that you remain relevant to clients, that you remain relevant to those you want to recruit, and that you have diverse teams, because that is when you can offer the best service. So when we saw that despite the fact that we had recruited more women than men from the universities in Sweden for, 15 years probably, like elsewhere in the world, women constitute the majority amongst law students in Sweden and often have the better grades. So when we recruit, we tend to often get a majority of women. But despite that, we saw 7-8 years ago that we didn't have equality at the more senior levels in our partnership. And it was actually I'm pleased to say my male colleagues, male partners on the board, which is the sort of decision-making body of Vinge, that took the view that, well, we really ought to change this. We have good role models. We have women who really contribute to the firm. We should have more. It should be equal. We should mirror at more senior levels what it looks like at more junior levels. So that's why we set a target in 2014, where we said that in the next 5 years, we would like 50% of our new partners, the partners we take in the next 5 years, to be women, because that mirrors what it looks like when we recruit from the universities. And now that we sort of almost, 4 years into that 5-year period, we set a period because we wanted to be able to measure it. We also set a period because obviously the occasional year you may have a majority of men or you may have a majority of women. We're very happy to see that actually things have shifted. We are recruiting more women partners to our ranks, and so we steadily having a more diverse partnership, which I think is hugely important, because that's where it sort of starts to make sure that your senior teams are diverse. Then it's so much easier to achieve equality also at more junior levels in a way that's relevant. So that's a very brief summary in relation to what we've done on gender diversity.
So you have often said, Maria Pia, that diversity is a public good, but it also pays. Can you speak a little bit about how you have achieved that success?
Again, it's a pleasure to do so, because I seriously believe that is the case, that it actually makes complete financial commercial sense to have diverse teams. I mean, there's a lot of statistics, obviously, including from McKinsey, showing that companies with diverse workforce, but also diverse leadership, do better financially. And obviously, ours is a small microcosmos, but we can see that since we actually took this initiative to make sure that we have a more diverse, gender equal partner get up, we have also become actually much more profitable. We also notice that increasingly clients are asking for diverse teams. They really want to not only meet, the middle-aged men, which has been traditionally what partners in law firms in Sweden and elsewhere too have been. And I think that's very helpful too. It means that given that we have a relatively good track record, we also get more attractive to clients looking for that sort of diversity initiative.
So you mentioned McKinsey, and McKinsey Global's reports show that gender equality really pays, that gender equality, if parity is reached, it will add $28 trillion to the global GDP and will raise Sweden's own GDP by 19%. So GDP and its correlation with diversity and gender equality is a powerful factor. And as you said, this is also driven by clients. So the client-driven factor is important. But your diversity and your diversity measures that you have taken go beyond gender. From what I have read and observed in your trajectory, Maria, you have set up several strategies. One was the diversity project, the diversity initiative in migrant communities that created a pipeline in schools, which then you encourage these young women to engage with the law as interns, go to law school, and then recruit from them. And you now have a real success story where the first woman to become partner from that diversity project is now part of your leadership team. And talking about the leadership executive team, it's also the way in which you are a real disruptive, innovative thinker. Your advertisement, the seat, is really one of the most innovative, imaginative pieces of advertising that I've ever come across, where, in other words, you're creating this seat for the youngest employee, the youngest lawyer at Vinge, and you're offering her a seat in the executive committee. So can you talk about how that dynamic works?
I think it stems from always wanting to remain relevant, because you need to be relevant to clients, to those you want to recruit at all times. The legal market is, again, I imagine, like elsewhere in the world, very competitive, and so it's important always to innovate, to think about how you can do things better and more efficient in a new way. I think diversity is absolutely key there too, to actually have different perspectives brought in. And that's why the reason why we've had our diversity project, which you mentioned, for now getting on for 16 years, so quite a long time, at least by Swedish standards. And I think that's been really useful. It also feels good, because it's not only we don't only do this with a view to getting people to be interested in becoming, practitioners in private practice, but generally to make sure that the legal world in Sweden is more diverse. After all, we have 20% of our population having more than one parent coming from a non-Swedish background. That's not reflected in the legal world generally. We think that the courts, the prosecutors' offices, etc., should be more diverse, and this project is our way of trying to make sure or contribute towards that ambition. I should say that it's actually it's open to men and women alike, because obviously it's the case that in people with out a sort of connection to law, and especially if they don't come from Sweden, maybe quite far removed from even thinking of law studies, and what we want to do is to plant a seed and say, well, it's not impossible to give inspiration, provide role models to show what working in courts, in prosecutors' offices, etc., may be like. And it's great to have success stories. It's actually a male partner who's now gone through the whole program, and now is a partner of Vinge, and that's great. I think that's encouraging, and it goes to show that we need to continue. Sadly, I should say, one would have hoped, of course, after 16 years that things might have sort of improved, but we feel that we have to, with large waves of immigration in the past few years, we have to continue to really make sure that we capture the diversity we have in the country, and make sure that reaches the legal world too. In terms of innovation, I think, again, I mean, as I started saying, it is the case that you have to continuously and at all times make sure that you improve, you innovate in order to remain relevant. Competition in the legal field is harsher than ever. New players coming into the markets, small niche practices, legal tech, big four accounting, international firms being interested also in domestic markets where they are active and lucrative. And in order to address all that competitiveness that we're seeing every day, we think it's hugely important to do new things, quite simply. We also notice that young people, law students, are increasingly unlikely to choose to go into private practice. They're looking for a purpose. They are more likely to go into public service. That's sort of topping the lists of popular employers. And in all of that, we want to make sure that we also communicate what we do. I think the general image of a law firm in Sweden, although we are a relatively modern society, is still quite sort of conservative and old-fashioned. It's a lot of middle-aged men working a lot, being in the office all times, and that's not the case any longer. And that's something we really try to communicate to students. But also, we really want to make sure that we understand what new generations want, what they want out of their careers, what they want, what issues they want to pursue, and that's why we have, as of early this year, invited one of our youngest or newest employees onto our management committee, which meets every month, and to be part of the decision making there, to bring on new ideas, perspectives. And I have to say, it's been great. Much more energetic meetings, and with perspectives that we simply wouldn't have had if we hadn't had somebody who's sort of, a generation younger than the rest of us. So that's been really good actually.
So you have mentioned the higher moral purpose of law, of lawyers, and in your own vision. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why Vinge, in I think 7 times in a row, has been awarded an award by the Business Law Awards, the European Women in Business Law Awards, for his gender equality work. So I have often thought of Vinge's success against the backdrop of Sweden's leadership in gender equality. Sweden very proudly boasts of and is very proud to label itself as a feminist government. Sweden is very proud to label itself and its feminist foreign policy. So for a long time, I wondered whether your own vision and Vinge's own vision grew out of Sweden's own focus and leadership in gender equality, both in policy and in practice. The policies are some of the world's best. In 2017, Sweden revised its gender equality anti-discrimination law to include transgender as a prohibited category of discrimination. It not only prohibits gender discrimination, but calls for companies to actively advance gender equality, which is really a proactive step. And its work-family reconciliation policies are some of the world's most generous policies. We were talking that it provides 460 days family leave policies for new parents, including a 90-day take it or leave it mandatory award for fathers. So it is fatherhood by gentle coercion. You force fathers to take that and become good fathers and perpetuate a cycle of good parenting, which I think is just so creative and important. But at the same time, you have argued that despite all of these very positive achievements in Sweden, the legal profession, especially the corporate law and corporate law firms, lag behind. And the gender gap is as pervasive in Sweden as is anywhere else in the world. That in fact, you have only 17 to 19% equity partners in Sweden. So can you talk about that challenge?
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that really has. I've really grappled with it. I think it's a hard one because, as you say, the infrastructure. Well, the society infrastructure is all there, and it is, a largely, at least by international standards, relatively equal society. And absolutely, we're certainly influenced by that. I mean, for instance, amongst our associates, it's been common both for the men and for the women for years to take parental leave when you have a child, and nobody questions that. It's just what you do. Although it's still the case that women do tend to take more leave than men. But the thing that has had me wonder is the statistics and what I see around in the market, which is that, as you say, there's still relatively few women partners. My own theory is that they're very attractive alternative career for lawyers. So women tend to become judges or prosecutors, etc., academics. And those are, of course, very fulfilling and very high-profile, stimulating careers. But it's quite interesting because it means, I think, from an international point of view, that although our society addresses the matters and issues that often up for discussion when you talk to US firms or UK firms or European firms, by way of very favorable parental leave packages, good childcare, which is very cheap, etc. That doesn't necessarily sort of provide an answer to the question. And I think, and these are my own sort of personal observations more than anything else, is that we struggle in private practice with a fairly sort of old-fashioned idea about what the job is all about. Often an idea that you have to work so hard in order to be a partner, and you have to really work on acquiring clients, more sales really than actually doing law, which is what you went to university for. It does seem to be a lot of different sort of aspects that together makes for a very challenging time. You have to be good at leadership. You have to be good at creating teams. You have to be good at client relationships, at administration, at providing advice, etc. And that sort of too muchness can sometimes be a bit, I think, of a something that doesn't appeal to everybody. But when we looked at setting a target, we also thought that we didn't really see so many clear patterns as to what it was that led to the relatively bad statistics in Sweden. And one observation I have now that we have had this target for a number of years is that we've seen many more women actually raising their hands and saying, I would like to do this. I'll have a shot, because the firm does seem committed to increasing the number of women partners. And I think that is actually as sort of difficult and as easy as it has been. And I've seen, again, statistics on this actually from McKinsey, that women are much more prone to sort of want to sit back and persuade themselves that, I shouldn't apply for this job. I want to really make sure that I tick all the boxes in order to go for the career. And also, again, this is the 30% club research that McKinsey carried out for various London professional services firms in 2012. The other thing that research showed was that women are also, they also think that being a partner is harder than the men typically think. And I actually think that there's truth in that, and that I can see that in my own ranks, and that by virtue of having a target, getting more women in, you look around and you see, oh, well, there are quite a lot of women. They're all quite different. And well, if she can and she, well, why not I? I mean, I think that's actually has been quite a good way of making sure that there are more women. Actually setting a target first and not necessarily having an idea what you're going to be doing in order to achieve it. We obviously had discussions, and we obviously do other things too. But I am interested 4 years into this project that actually communicating your targets itself has been I believe very powerful.
So your target that you have so clearly and powerfully communicated calls for 50% women in leadership by 2020.
50% of new partners coming in. Yeah,
new partners coming in.
Because it has to start, I think, with new partners. When you run a law firm, I think you're concerned with making sure that the demography is good. I mean, that you have senior as well as junior partners in all relevant practice areas, and you wouldn't want to sort of get rid of people too early. I mean, obviously you have a lot of good contribution from senior generations, and you just, I think, have to accept that things will take a bit of time. But what I think is important to focus on is what is your idea in relation to new intakes, to make sure that there you have diversity, and also, in addition, of course, that you have a talent pool amongst associates to recruit from that is relatively equal, and that we have now, and I think that's actually one of the most encouraging and great things we achieved with the target that we have. Both managed to hopefully, and we'll see next year, achieve the target, but also make the pool of talent, the people who could become partners, that pool more equal.
So you're very confident that you're on your way to meet that target. And you also talked about the role model effect of having women like you being CEO of Vinge. And you have often said that Vinge is one of the most popular law firms for women law graduates. And women law graduates often mention Vinge as their favorite law firm. So you have the role model effect, but you're still struggling with recruitment. You said that you were recently chairing an IBA meeting where recruitment was a major issue, recruitment of women. So I wanted to talk about that in terms of how do we harness the role model effect, but also harness the male champions of change. As you have mentioned, men are great sponsors of women, and men have to be the transformative thinkers who mentor women. So you have on the one side the importance of women role models and feminist icons, and then men who support that ideal as being good for business, good for men, and good for the world.
And I think you can do that in different ways. And I know a lot of firms do great work with mentor sponsor programs. We have done that to, I suppose, a lesser extent. But I think the important thing is to have a good internal discussion, actually, however you achieve that. What we do, I mean, for instance, just after this summer, we're going to have a breakfast panel with some of our partners, carefully chosen, to talk about the senior careers on offer at Vinge. What do they involve? What are actually the requirements on a partner? How do you go about to become a partner? Because all of that, I think, traditionally at least in law firms, had been slightly sort of shrouded in mystery. And we want to be transparent, because I think that, again, is something that helps. And of course, the people on the panel will be both men and women, because I believe, I mean, as you were saying, that the role models can be, isn't dependent on gender at all. And besides, I mean, it's of course the case also that this is something that our male associates is equally interested in. How is the firm thinking about these issues? So I think, I mean, that's one thing we're doing, and I think. In terms of sort of, we're not an enormous firm, I should say. I mean, we were about 340 fee earners. So in that sort of setup, you can still have a fairly good idea of the individual. I think the individual is really, really important in this, and to make sure that we do help people with their queries and questions that they have in relation to a future career, and provide inspiration. And I think, the benefit of being relatively small is that with that sort of oversight you get in my position and other leadership positions, we can sort of match people. So having said that, we don't do all that much with coaching and mentoring. We do a bit of that, and I think that's actually quite powerful too, to make sure that people speak to each other. I think that often starts and ends with that. Communications, speaking to each other, inspiring each other, talking about what's difficult, and seeing ways around it in whatever context you can, whether it's more sort of centrally organized settings like breakfast seminars or whatever, or just the individual coffee breaks.
You have often said, Maria Pia, that you're riding a wave around the world that realizes that in order to lead globally, one has to be a global leader on gender equality. And the MeToo movement in the last 2 years also has contributed to the realization that gender discrimination and the subordination of women is a major problem in every sector of work. And in Sweden, there is now a rising Us Too movement that has now become very much a dynamic part and an organic part of law firms. So can you talk to us about the Us Too movement and that impact, and how that impacts your work at Vinge and around Sweden in general?
No, absolutely. I mean, we had in the wake of MeToo individual petition by various sectors of society. It started with the actresses at the Royal Theatre, but then there was a large petition by some 4,600 lawyers from all sorts of walks of, the legal world, lawyers practicing in courts, in private practice, and the full range, and with a lot of stories of harassment, discrimination, etc. And this made all the media front pages and created a lot of important discussion, I think, which we are still sort of very much continuing to pursue. What it did was to highlight that our profession, broadly defined, isn't isolated from this movement. I think for us, it's been, generally speaking, good, because it's certainly focused everybody's minds on that there is a lot of issues to deal with. I've heard others saying, including as recently as 2 weeks ago at a panel in New York that I attended, that it potentially also didn't serve women well, in the sense that men are now very worried about, even entering an elevator together with a woman, or bringing an associate along to a client. I mean, that sort of wariness of how you should be handling situations, I think, could occur. I think there our society is relatively modern. It is the case that we have, I think, again, generally speaking, fairly good understanding of how you just deal with each other on a sort of everyday basis. So we haven't necessarily seen that sort of result of the Me Too movement, but instead a focus on these issues. A lot of questions being asked by law students, by clients, by the media. So what are you doing to address this? And I think employers of lawyers all over Sweden have done various different things. We were fortunate in the sense that we had already thought quite a lot about these issues. We had policies, practices, etc. in place that we could sort of point to, including a whistleblowing service that if you have a complaint, whether it's in relation to harassment, discrimination, or something else, you can complain on a completely anonymous basis to us, and we will deal with that. And this, if there's a complaint against me, there's also a way to deal with that. So we really sort of thought that through quite carefully. But I think the most important thing is to continue to work with cultural issues, I believe. What we see when we talk, for instance, to our associates, we did that as late as beginning of last week, actually. We wanted to follow up. So a year plus after the Us2 movement, where are we now? What issues are there in our corridors that we are not aware of, that we should be addressing? And we have I think a good conversation. I think what I hear is that there's still quite a lot of jargon that's unnecessary, and potentially there's also sort of what is perceived as disrespectful behavior, which doesn't necessarily equal disrespectful behavior, but which is perceived of that, and where we obviously have a communication exercise to do. We have to make sure that our older generation of lawyers and other staff understands how younger generations perceive them. I think with demography, where I think our youngest is 19 years old, and our eldest is 75, you will have communication differences between generations, and I think that's something that we still as a firm have to address, and I think quite a lot of other employers of lawyers, and I think currently that's very much where we're at in the market. Which is not to say that discrimination, harassment, that sort of issues that were brought to light by Us2 aren't still in focus. I think those cases are more rare, but I think generally speaking, again, firms, courts, employers have become much better at addressing that sort of incidents and issues, and that's a great thing actually with MeToo.
So, as we know, for most of recorded history, women have been excluded from leadership positions. And you, Maria Pia, in a form that unique 4% are women who lead their law firms across the world. So, this is really one of the pinnacles of leadership. So, I want to now turn the conversation to your own leadership philosophy. How do you envision your leadership philosophy transforming not just Vinge, but Sweden? Because these issues that you're grappling with, addressing gender discrimination, advancing women's leadership through targets, through role models, through male champions of change, by addressing gender bias, through innovation, through diversity plans, are important strategies and policies for the rest of Sweden, Europe, and the world. So I want you to take a moment to reflect and to be introspective about your own leadership philosophy, and how can that help build momentum largely in the world?
Oh, that's a big question. Well, I think these topics have always been interesting to me. I think when I joined the firm, it was not a very diverse place. I mean, we had 2 women partners. Fortunately, they were quite unlike each other. I mean, they were very different from each other. So I think they were role models to me. But somewhere in my early days, I certainly thought, this is surely not what is going to be long term. And I feel thrilled that I've been able to be part. It's not only down to me. I really want to underline that. We're a management and a board generally with a diversity agenda, but it's been great to be part of that and trying to change things slowly. I think my professional services universe is a very interesting one in the sense that, as you say, the statistics there for women leaders is very low, which is peculiar. Maybe because traditionally it's been the case, and I think that's partly the case still here in the US, that you have to both be a leader, a manager, or a CEO, and continue full-time practice, which is a very, very hard task. I haven't had that requirement on me. I have only had to require a little bit of keep a tiny foot in practice, but it's I certainly think that looking more generally at how professional services leadership can change and become more diverse, that is really very relevant in the sense that we are an important part of the sort of financial ecosystem of any country. And I suppose then the step from there to the corporate world at large is not very, very big either. In terms of leadership philosophy, I sometimes get asked these questions, and I'm not entirely sure that I have thought long and hard about what my philosophy is. I was sort of thrown into leadership in 2012, having been a partner with a firm for many years, a board member. That's where I sort of learned the trade, I think. But I believe, and I think that stems from working in an environment where you have lots of really clever, talented, driven people, that in order to be a leader in that sort of context, you have to be inclusive, you have to be a facilitator, you have to make sure that you really make use of people's talents and have them largely get on and but then have an ambitious agenda. I mean, just as ambitious as when you service clients, when you want their perception of your service to be, wow, that was really absolutely stellar. I couldn't have got better advice on this complicated project or whatever. I think my approach to being in my position as a law firm manager has been fairly similar. To give it my very best, devote a lot of time and effort, and also trying to understand the wilder world of law firm management, professional services management, because that's quite an interesting, I think, and part of leadership theory.
So that is your leadership philosophy, an ambitious agenda. And that is really what you're all about, Maria Pia, and it's very much consistent with James McGregor Burns, who's one of the great minds on leadership theories, where he says a real leader is not a transactional leader, but a transformative leader. So it goes beyond transactional day-to-day routine problems to addressing big societal problems. Big moral purpose behind leadership. What is the moral purpose? It is not only about running the law firm smoothly and efficiently, but it is about ensuring that the law firm as a whole has an impact on larger societal issues. And there is no greater cause, there is no greater pressing issue than the unfinished business of women's leadership. And that is what you as a transformative leader is addressing, this unfinished business of women's leadership and gender equality through your law firm and through that society in general. So if I may, I think that is your ambitious agenda.
You've formulated it for me. That's very helpful.
So, couple of questions before we wrap up. One is, what is next for you? What is next for Vinge in this ambitious agenda? How do you want Vinge to lead as an innovator, as a transformative force in the world? And thirdly, what advice do you give our next generation of women leaders here at Penn Law School and around the world?
Well, for me, I'm still haven't finished my my job at Vinge. I think there's still quite a lot to do, but then again, it's I think it's exciting, having realized relatively late in life that leadership management is actually where my passion lies, rather than law as a trade, as an advisor. And maybe pursue those interests in the future. I think that's not too far away from what I may want to do, and perhaps in a completely different context. Although I'm always envious of both the US and the UK, where it's more common to move from the business sector to public service, and vice versa. That's not so common yet in the Nordic countries. So that's very, very broadly and very, I suppose, roughly what I'm thinking. My current thinking on next steps is. In terms of what's next for Vinge, well, I think one thing is what I've seen actually. And it's very important to continue to pursue the important principles, initiatives, etc. you take over time, because even if you do achieve something and sort of reach the next step on the ladder, and to some extent I think we're sort of on the cusp of doing that, you can quite quickly fall back unless you actually devote interest, passion, time, effort on making sure that you continue to move up. I have seen firms with ambitious diversity agendas, often driven by a group of men and women, but perhaps one woman in particular. And then the woman leaves, and then several women leave, and all of a sudden, all that work was sort of almost in vain. And I would loathe to see that happening. So I think if there's one thing that I would like to have, stay behind when the time comes for me to leave is actually that we continue to drive an agenda and continue to succeed on that front, and hopefully do more on diversity more broadly, because there we still have challenges in terms of recruiting a more sort of diverse pool of associates and other employees.
And you were telling me how in your own visits and your engagement with other Nordic countries, you find that the diversity still lags behind, despite the fact that Nordic countries are considered and assumed to be leaders in the area of inclusion.
That's true. And because all the Nordic countries are relatively well set up in terms of infrastructure and legislation, etc. But it is the case that private practice, professional services is still relatively male dominated, and Sweden is not statistically the country that's worst off. We have a good conversation. It's a small part of the world, and we're relatively close culturally. So we try to share experiences and best practices in order to see what can be done to change. The markets where things are not developing as rapidly as they are currently in Sweden. I mean, Norway, for instance, which is very similar to us and in many ways has even worse statistics than Sweden does. I think it's about somewhere 11-12% of women, of partners are women in the major law firms there.
So the feminist global legal icon, whom we all adore and revere, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, has said women will have achieved true equality when men share with women the responsibility of bringing up the next generation. So what does Vinge do to ensure that men play that shared caregiving role of the next generation?
Well, I think as you were saying before, we have a very comprehensive and generous parental leave package generally by virtue of legislation, and we topped that up as a firm. What we've done is we have actually revised relatively recently our parental leave package. So essentially you have, irrespective of gender, you're entitled to 6 months off on a very large part of your pay. And that is actually a fairly short period for Sweden, 6 months. But we have done it that way so as to encourage women to come back more quickly and men to take more paternity leave. And this is only now 2 years into practice, but we have actually seen a shift where women do come back more quickly from maternity leave and men increasingly take paternity leave. I think that's actually quite powerful.
It is a very powerful message too, that women are not considered the primary caregivers and that women see themselves as combining work and family and returning to work sooner than expected.
Yeah. So I think that's been quite a good way forward. And I think also it's been very encouraging to me that in the past 2 years, when I've had young partners coming to me and say, I'm going to be on leave, it's actually been men, in three cases. And I think when the male partners start to take paternity leave, that's a real signal that it's all right, and that again there's a real there's a shift, and I think good hope for the future as well.
So your diversity and inclusion plan really encompasses not only gender, but also this generational gap, that you as a leader, you're constantly listening to the insights and wisdom of the younger generation. And you were sharing with me the fact that there is also a sense of impatience among them for innovation, to create new strategies. And while you wish to celebrate that and enable them to do that, you're also cautious about losing focus. So can you talk about that in terms of your leadership philosophy?
Well, I think one thing again that I'm very focused on is to make sure that we have good leadership succession within Vinge, because I think it is important in professional services firms of our size to have good leadership generally, and also to have thought through how you're going to go about it, and so we are increasingly trying to bring in our younger partners, have them get a better overview of our business, understand not only their practice area and their teams, but more generally how a law firm actually works, what you have to know in order to be able to in due course run the firm, and so we're doing a piece of strategy work now where we have basically delegated most of the work to our young partners. and who have had to look at different issues. And one of those areas is innovation. We believe that innovation is very important to continue to stay relevant. And there's a huge amount of enthusiasm, which I'm very happy about. A lot of ideas about what we should be doing, both in terms of tech, but otherwise too. But I think, again, from my experience, if you actually want to achieve things, implement things, if you're actually really going to see results, you have to focus. You can't do everything, and you have to figure out what it is in your, in the great scheme of things that will make a real difference, and what it is that you're passionate about. I think that's actually a good test too, to be slightly sort of passion driven when you choose the projects that you embark on and implement. So I think that's also my thinking in relation to innovation. There's so many areas in which you can innovate as a law firm, but it's a question of finding what's relevant to you and your practice, depending on where you are in the market and where you want to be as well. So I think that's been my message in the very good conversations we have internally with younger generations on what we should be doing next.
So this has been a fascinating conversation, Maria Pia, and just learning from you how your higher moral purpose behind your leadership is driving lawyers, the lawyers in your law firm, but those who are in contact with you feel that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And that is really the essence of leadership, how you make others feel that they are bigger than themselves, that they're part of something larger, broader, that's going to create a legacy and impact the world in ways that will make a positive difference. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for creating structures that will endure. Thank you for creating a vision that is reimagining the world of the legal profession in Sweden and beyond. And most of all, for empowering the women leaders and the next generation of lawyers. So I want you to have the last word. How can you inspire our next generation of women and their peers, the male peers? So leave us with some aspirational thoughts.
Well, I think to mention somebody who you already mentioned, Rangita, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was in Stockholm recently, and I got to hear her, and she had a piece of advice that I really, really thought was 100% correct. She was asked, so if, by actually a young Swedish law student, what's your piece of advice to me? And she said, do something that has a higher purpose in the long run, because that is when you're going to do really well and feel that it's worthwhile. And I think that's so true. But I also think that it can actually translate to private practice. And that's something we've been talking about internally, because you just have to see what you can do using your own platform to create change, to be an important part of society, to constantly improve and inspire. And so that message, I think, was really rang true with me, and was something that I took on board, and I think again would like to pass on. And I think this whole thing of doing something you're passionate about, and not to is also a message that I like to convey. But also actually something I told my son as recently as last night. He's wondering, what is my passion? Because he likes so many different things. He's really interested in huge amounts of things. And I just said, well, at 15, slow down a little bit. You'll find your passion. To me, it took about, I was 42, when I realized this is what I really, really love doing. And I think that's actually quite good to know that you can have a fairly, it isn't necessarily straight road. You can by trying different things, sometimes failing, sometimes just coming to dead ends, I think, but still not losing sight of trying to find what really makes you want to get up in the morning, and really want to make you, it really makes you want to devote a lot of energy. I think not to lose sight of that, but and also try to find it. I think that's something that I'd really recommend anybody to do.
So bringing it all home, Ruth Bader Ginsburg has famously said that she found her passion in Sweden when she accompanied her law professor to Sweden to do research. And there she found a passion in opera, she found a passion in gender equality law and anti-discrimination laws in Sweden that she brought home. And she really stands for the message that we have to cross-fertilize ideas, and that these are transnational idea sharing that needs to take place. And that is what you have done for us today, Maria Pia, the transnational idea sharing, what is happening in Vinge, in Sweden, and the lessons that we can learn and share with you. So thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us. And we know that you will go on with a higher and more purpose-driven, ambitious agenda for Vinge and for the world.
Well, thank you, Rangita. Lovely to have been here.